are back at the CTC meeting for August 20th, and we are, our August 2020 meeting, and it is item 19, the update on the Highway Bridge Program, with John Prey leading it.
All right, hi commissioners. Item number 19 is an information item where Caltrans will be giving a presentation about the Highway Bridge Program. The Highway Bridge Program is a federally funded program that's focused on maintaining and fixing locally owned bridges, and it's managed by the Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. The commission provides an annual allocation to Caltrans to administer this program, and so commission staff thought it would be helpful to have Caltrans give a presentation highlighting some details of the program. Dee Lamb, who is the acting division chief of the Caltrans Division of Local Assistance, is here to make the presentation. So Dee, if you are online, go ahead and take it away.
I am online, John. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, CTC staff, and others joining us today for this opportunity to present this information item to provide an overview of the local highway bridge program. As John mentioned, I'm Dee Lamb, Acting Division Chief for Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. I do want to note that I'm joined by our Highway Bridge Program team, Robert Peterson and Lyndon Newton, who will help us with technical questions to bring you a value-added presentation. So what we'll do is we're going to step through the program's background, statute, partnerships, eligibility, funding capacity, bridge needs, funding demand, challenges, and proposed program management recommendations that are currently under discussion. Next slide, please. A little bit of background. HPB is a federal program managed by Caltrans Division of Local Assistance, providing federal funds to replace, rehabilitate, or perform preventative maintenance on locally owned public highway bridges. Federal funds are made available for bridge projects in California through Title 23 of the United States Code. Federal Highways has delegated most of the management of the program to Caltrans through a joint stewardship and oversight agreement. The federal funds are provided over several years through the federal transportation legislation. I'll definitely speak more on funding later in our presentation. The Highway Bridge Program works on a 15-year outlook, 4 years of programming in the FSTIP, and 11 years of planned projects. Now, this is due to the length of time for bridge projects to be completed. Currently, there are 814 Highway Bridge Program projects in the FSTIP. The Commission, as John mentioned, provides an annual allocation for the federal funds for Highway Bridge Program and the Prop 1B bond funds for seismic projects. Next slide, please. California Local Bridge Inventory. So federal law requires bridges longer than 20 feet to be inspected and the condition reported to federal highways on a biennial basis. All states submit the data and it becomes known as the National Bridge Inventory. California specifically has approximately 25,700 MBI bridges. Of these, 12,300 are owned by local agencies, which is our focus today. The inspection reports document deficiencies that the Highway Bridge Program will use to determine funding, eligibility, and scope of work. Now, this is important because only locally owned NBI bridges are eligible for the local Highway Bridge Program funding. Next slide, please. Now, before we move on to eligible scopes and funding, I want to take a moment to recognize the close working partnership with the Highway Bridge Program Advisory Committee members from organizations that you see listed here. The HPB Advisory Committee was officially formed in 1997. I want to emphasize that the committee serves a very important role to provide customer input and advice to the department for the development of a multi-year program, establish selection criteria to ensure the objectives of the program are met, and develop procedures to encourage timely use of funds. Now, over the years, the committee has worked hard to tackle a myriad of challenges, some that will be shared later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So on to eligible scopes. This slide shows the types of work that HPB program funds: local bridge inspections, preventive maintenance, error countermeasures, replacement, seismic, retrofit, rehabilitation, and painting. And then we've also provided photos throughout the presentation to give you examples of the projects. Next slide, please. So on to funding. definitely a complex slide, but I'll step us through this. The Highway Bridge program has been funded in California through a programmatic agreement with the regions since 2012, when MAP 21 was signed into legislation. So with each new federal legislation, California and the regions enter a new programmatic agreement. No significant adjustments to the Highway Bridge program funding have been made since 2009. So the current programmatic agreement provides $289 million a year for the local Highway Bridge program, shown here as a red dashed line on the chart. The orange bars show the 4 years of current 2019 FDIP for HPB programming, which must be financially constrained. The blue bars show the funding needed for the unprogrammed cost on the existing 814 bridge projects, evenly spread over 11 years. So the funding needs exceed current capacity. The Highway Bridge program is not a 15-year program, but it's closer to an 18-year program. An additional $73 million per year is needed to get to a 15-year program. Next slide, please. So a little bit on the demand. So we want to demonstrate the known demand on the Highway Bridge program, so exceeding current capacity or funding levels. So like the previous slide, the orange bars are the 4-year FSTIP programming. The red bars and dashed lines, the current $289 million programming capacity. The blue bars are the remaining unprogrammed demand from the current 814 projects. Now the light blue checkerboard bars that you see represent the demand that cannot be programmed. The funding not programmed in 1 year moves to the next year and accumulates. So you see the yellow bars there represent $422 million for 138 projects that are eligible projects requesting HVB funding. So next slide, please. So the demand continues to grow. Here we're going to highlight the high-cost projects. So there are 814 projects for $5.14 billion in the Highway Bridge program and the 2019 FSTIP. So 49 projects, or 6%, are high-cost projects. High-cost bridge projects have the right-of-way or construction phase exceeding $20 million. High-cost projects are cash managed and only programmed in the FSTIP with $20 million per year per project. Now, although there are only 6% high-cost bridge projects, they account for 42% of the total highway bridge program cost, as you see depicted in the second pie chart there. Okay, on to the next slide. So what have we done? So HPB realized that the ability to program funding when it's needed was going to be a problem and is not sustainable. So this began a critical review of program management that resulted in policy changes. So this slide shows the changes the advisory committee and the department have made. These are global management changes for the projects into the Highway Bridge program. In 2015, we established the Bridge Investment Credit Policy to encourage local agencies to use non-highway bridge program funds to take care of their NBI bridges. Then the Highway Bridge program would provide a credit for use on a future project. The amount of the local funds expended is the amount of credit received. In 2016, we looked at the lowest priority project scopes. The result was the very low priority project scopes were eliminated. In 2018, to get to a 15-year program, we prioritized new projects and only program what is sustainable into the program. Next slide. So I just talked about more programmatic program management policy changes. This speaks to the project delivery policy changes that we focused on last year. And this was to better help local agencies deliver projects timely, hence the development and implementation of timely use of funds rules. We noticed projects programmed in the current year did not request funds, which takes up programming capacity. The result was to only program new projects in for the last 2 years of the FSTIP. And if the project did not start in one of those years, it gets removed from the program. The local agency could reapply. So due to limited programming capacity every year, the last 3 policy changes created an incentive for programming. So the incentive is if a project has programming in the current year and funds are requested by February 1st, then funds are received. If not, current programming gets pushed out to the last year of the current EBSTA. We've been using all of our funds over the last decade plus. We fund by phase as projects meet the federal milestones. We definitely strive to program funding for projects that allow local agencies to deliver successfully. Next slide. So highway challenges and recommendations. These items are not listed in any particular order, but I wanted to kind of step through as many as I can here. So we continue to face challenges driven by many factors, recent construction cost increases, insufficient funding, high-cost bridges, aging infrastructure, long project delivery. So we're currently working very closely with the advisory committee on program reform. So discussion on increasing preventative maintenance to keep bridges in good condition as long as possible, utilizing the upcoming local bridge assessment for statewide needs, funding the most cost-effective project scopes, and much more. Although these recommendations do not generate additional revenue to cover the shortfall shared, we continue to manage funds received to the best of our ability. I think with that, I do want to emphasize, yes, there are long-term consequences for the funding shortfall that will result in more record of critical findings when inspections are done. I think that definitely concludes the presentation. I wanted to conclude by saying we recognize local bridges are a critical piece of California infrastructure. We will continue to work with local agencies through the advisory committee, hold Caltrans district monthly meetings, provide training for districts and locals, and more, given the oversubscribed program and challenges that we face. So with that, thank you for this opportunity on this information item, and we're happy to take questions. I do want to say if we can unmute Robert Peterson and Linda Newton, that would be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Dee, for this presentation. We do have Commissioner Eager that wants to ask a question, and I was wondering if we had any public comment on this item. Okay, Commissioner Eager, please ask your question.
I'm sorry, I had asked, this was a question for the previous speaker. I know it just now came up, but this was about the right-of-way and the Express West high-speed rail.
Oh,
it's okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm fine. I can ask it later.
Okay, he's still on the line, so if you don't mind, we'd be happy to ask your question since it's the first one you've asked all day. So let's please get it asked.
Okay, my question just was that I know that this project goes to Victorville and the California high-speed rail project goes to Palmdale. I was wondering if this particular group was working on that gap between Victorville and Palmdale as far as right-of-way issues go.
So this is Mike Beauchamp. Currently we're not. Currently our focus is just on the Apple Valley to Las Vegas segment.
And that's not in the future plans?
Oh, I believe they have the future plans. That just said they haven't got to that point yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dee, for your presentation. We will move on to item 20.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Norton.
Okay.
Commissioners, tab number 20 is an information item to update the minor B project list under the fiscal year 2021 SHOP minor construction program. As part of the recently approved update to the SHOP guidelines and resolution G-19-05A, the department is to present an information item on the status and any updates to the minor B project list. Those updates are classified in the book item attachment as either additions to or removals from the minor B list. As this is the first commission meeting since the approved 2021 minor program, commission staff felt it was prudent for the department to present this policy matter and bring attention to the new practice of minor B project updates to the commissioners. In the future, this report will likely be included under the information calendar. Commission staff has reviewed this item and finds the information to be acceptable.
Okay. Are there any questions from the commissioners on this item? Okay. Any public comment? Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation, Gitesh. All right, next item is item 21, the 2027 performance targets for the supplemental asset classes in the state highway system.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Commissioners, item 21 is an information item to discuss the supplemental asset classes that have been adopted into the Transportation Asset Management Plan. In March of 2018, the department recommended and the commission approved 10-year constrained performance targets for the 8 supplementary asset classes. Mike Johnson, Caltrans Asset Manager, is here to explain the target setting process for the supplementary assets.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and congratulations to Chair Norton and Vice Chair Alvarado. Today, as Terry mentioned, we'll be presenting an informational item on the supplemental asset class targets. Next slide, please. So we talk a lot about the 4 core assets, which are the pavements, bridges, culverts, and transportation management systems. The way that the asset management plan is set up, we have created a tiering structure with those 4 core assets kind of being in the driver's seat, if you will, because they represent about 70% of all the shop investment. The supplementary asset classes, which are shown on the screen here, include important but more minor and probably less visible aspects of the transportation system, in some cases at least. These supplemental asset classes combined represent about 4% of the shop investment. There was a question about the targets. These were included in the benchmark report that I gave in June. All of these supplemental asset classes have a 0 poor desired state of repair or target. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the attributes of these assets. Typically, they all have age-based conditions. In other words, they're typically not subject to a formal inspection program, formal reports being written, or condition assessments. It's more of an informal assessment being done by department maintenance staff in most cases. These desired state of repair targets that were established and adopted by the commission were set by expert judgment, and I'll talk a little bit about the thinking behind that. And as I mentioned, overall, these are considered supplemental in part because there's not a formal program for their assessment, and because of the relatively minor portion of the overall shop that they represent in terms of investment. Next slide. So as Terry mentioned in the March 21st CTC meeting in 2018, we brought forward targets for these supplementary asset classes. And these are a couple quotes from the book item. The targets reflect the recommended system condition levels used to evaluate unconstrained system need as required by code. The unconstrained system need means, in effect, that we are setting targets independent of how much money we have available. This is required at the time was required as part of the 10-year plan, and now has been incorporated into the State Highway System Management Plan through changes to the California Government Code. There is a provision that requires us to define the total needs on the system so that legislative members can understand what kind of liability we might be incurring by unmet maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement needs on the system. I talked a little bit about the fact that these are unconstrained, and it's really important to understand that these targets were all established pre-SB1. Had we not done them as unconstrained targets, we would have been in quite a bit of trouble when SB1 passed. And so this is a little bit of a background of just how we got to where we are. This, again, is an adopted book item. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to kind of walk the commission through how we use these things. So I'm starting on the upper left, and this would play much better animated, but I'll give it a shot here. So this is a conceptual example. We start at a current condition, what's called our current state, in this case, the number 10. So we're saying we have 10 poor condition assets. And our goal, which is on the far right, is our desired state, which is 0. So between where we are and where we want to be, we define a current performance gap. And we do this for over 30 different objectives in the state highway system management plan for each of our 12 districts. So in total, we're doing this over 400 times for different aspects of the state highway system. But the total unconstrained need that we present in that state highway system management plan is this distance or the gap in performance between where we are and where we want to be times the price unit cost to close that gap. So in this example, if our gap was 10, what at 10 widgets and each one costs $5, then this would represent an unconstrained need of 50. Next slide. So in conclusion, the supplemental asset classes have less robust inventory and assessment compared to the core assets, significantly less. These targets that we have presented represent a desired state of repair, and they are independent of available funding, i.e. they're unconstrained. And this is important because in the last state highway system management plan that we published in 2019, we had identified a $9 billion annual need versus a $4.3 billion annual available funding. So in other words, we only have about 50 cents on every dollar that we need, or 47% to be exact. And that percentage is actually going to go down because we are midstream in the 2021 State Highway System Management Plan, and we are intending to add the costs associated with the mitigation of sea level rise and complete streets. This will, in fact, increase the need, but the funding will remain the same. So the available funding percentage will drop significantly. So, our expected outcomes based on currently available resources are shown in the State Highway System Management Plan. It has an unconstrained needs assessment and then a completely fiscally constrained investment plan. And then it has the performance that results from that constrained investment plan. And so that really concludes kind of a quick overview of these supplemental asset classes. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Commissioner Lyou, and then we're going to go back to item 19 because Secretary Kim had a question on the Highway Bridge Program. But first, we want to get to Commissioner Lyou.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand how these different targets work, and I had a conversation with staff about it. I recognize that the targets depend in part on whether they're constrained or unconstrained. I just guess when I'm looking at the big gap between a good target and a fair target on things like the roadside rest facilities or the weigh and motion scales, whether we're setting reasonable targets to even consider what unconstrained would look like, and perhaps in the TAMP or the Highway Assets Management Plan, we are setting those constrained targets, I guess, is what I've heard. And my question is, do we need to set targets that are more realistic yet stretch goals that we can meet to address these supplemental assets?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's a great question. So within the realm of asset management, we typically set targets for the unconstrained, or technically it's called the desired state of repair. And then we develop a constrained investment plan that in effect allows you to define how close to the desired state of repair you can get. That is encompassed within the state highway system management plan. But with respect to the two specific asset classes that you mentioned, the safety roadside rest areas and the weigh in motion scales, these do have a higher percentage of the asset being desired in good rather than fair condition. And the primary justification for this is that both of those are public facing asset classes. In other words, for example, with the roadside rest areas, they are there to improve highway safety. And we feel that it's important to keep them in a relatively high percentage of them in a state of really good repair, because we don't want to have to shut them down unexpectedly. That would have a negative consequence on the safety of the system. So we hold them to a little bit higher standard. And for the weigh in motion scales, these help enforce local load limits on the highway system, which in turn will slow deterioration down. And if those scales are not operational, then we don't really know exactly what's running down the highway. And so for those reasons, we tend to want to keep those in a little bit higher state of condition.
Okay. Well, with that question answered, I appreciate your time, and we want to move back to the item 19 and the update on the highway bridge program. And Secretary Kim, could you please ask your question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Not a question, but just a couple of comments on the highway bridge program. As you saw in Dee's presentation, this is one of those heavily oversubscribed programs. It's a relatively small program, roughly $300 million a year, but the needs are 10, 15, 20 times that of what's available. And in the time I've been in this role, I've received many, many inquiries regarding the highway bridge program. And the concern I have is that there appears to be a disconnect between what local project sponsors expect in terms of state funding and what the state is realistically able to provide in terms of funding. And so we're going to have to find ways to manage those expectations going forward. At the same time, there are success stories. And one of them I want to point out is the Mount Vernon Viaduct in San Bernardino County. It's a project with a long history with different scope changes, but recently Caltrans and the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority were able to come to an agreement on funding and overall project scope and schedule. And so that paved the way forward, and there is a path forward now to move ahead with the Mount Vernon Viaduct, which is badly in need of replacement. So there's a way to manage these as long as all parties come together and try to find a way forward. Also want to mention that the book item for this presentation says that the local highway bridge program is a federal program, but it's actually not a federal program. MAP 21 discontinued the federal highway bridge program, but at the time it passed, Caltrans chose to continue administering its own highway bridge program at the state level for local bridges using federal funding. So I just want to point that out as a technical point. And so with that, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. This is very helpful information. I wanted to go back to item 21 because Mitch Weiss had some comments to make on that item.
So first of all, I just want to acknowledge we're doing a little bit more jumping around than usual. We're having a little more communication problems than usual, recognizing when people want to speak on an item. So we're going to do our best to deal with that. And if somebody wants to speak, please let us know. Our desire is to have everyone be heard. That said, on the supplemental asset classes, in looking at that, to me, rather than having a unconstrained goal. You know, what could we do if we had as much money as you know, as we wanted? It seems like it would be much more useful as a tool for policymakers to know where are we going to get when these asset classes, with these asset classes, with the amount of money we have constrained, recognizing that our priority is the 4 primary asset classes, so that if you know, if some supplementary asset classes we're really only going to get to 40% good, then we as policymakers can recognize that and see if there needs to be some type of decision made accordingly. So I would suggest that what we want to do is work with the department so that by the time we get to the next update, or the first update to the asset management plan in 2022, we can revise these targets to be realistic and achievable, recognizing that our focus is on the 4 primary asset classes. Mike, is that something you guys can do?
Mitch, we could certainly work with you. You know, we're trying, as you know, to sort of thread the needle between state and federal regulations, and those targets are required to be unconstrained by both measures. You know, when you think about it, if the targets were previously constrained, then we would show no needs beyond available funding. And I don't believe that anybody thinks that's real. And then additionally, the other, you know, a couple other major pitfalls with that approach is that emerging needs such as climate change and complete streets would not show up as needs at all, you know, within the system, because you're going to limit what your needs are based on your target. So I think what we could do to address your point is it's really in the area of the investment plan, and just show what we will get in the investment plan, which is, it's currently in the State Highway System Management Plan. It was also in the benchmark report that I presented in June, those projections of what you would get, but we can certainly work with CTC staff to you know, to better articulate that point.
Thank you. And I think to your point, it may be necessary to think about some of our supplementary asset classes differently, because some of them are really different questions. You know, do we have complete streets everywhere we need them is a much different question than what are what is the condition of the complete streets we have. So Mike, I appreciate your willingness to work, and hopefully you know, by setting a target 2 years out, I've articulated an achievable target.
Thank you
Yeah, I
very
think we
much.
could
This
do that.
important point, and it really is important as we're thinking about the additional complete streets targets that we're hitting. So thank you very much for adding that. And we are going to move to item 22, and that's update on the California Transportation Plan and the Regional Transportation Strategic Plan. Laura?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 22 is an informational item for Caltrans to provide you with an update on the California Transportation Plan and the Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan. As these plans are developed, the Commission will be asked to review them and provide comments. I wanted to highlight the importance of these plans as they will guide Caltrans project nominations in future formula and discretionary funding cycles. With that, I will turn it over to Jeannie Ward-Waller, Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs at Caltrans.
Thank you, Laura. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I know it's getting late in the day, so I'm going to try to make this a quick presentation, although I also want to say I think this is one of the most important items you'll see on your agenda this month. So I do want to just take the time to stress you know, a few key aspects of these two plans. They are really very important documents for the state. So thank you all again for having me. Jeannie Ward-Waller, I'm the Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs at Caltrans. And I just appreciate the time with you, Commissioners, and want to congratulate Chair Norton and Vice Chair Alvarado for your leadership appointments today. So the California Transportation Plan is well underway. We're actually bringing a draft to you very shortly. So I'll spend a little bit more time talking about the CTP, which really is the overall policy framework for the transportation system statewide, and setting a long-range vision that all of our modal plans really build off of. It's a visionary document, as I said, more of a policy-oriented document, whereas the ITSP, or the interregional plan, really is more focused on specific interregional corridors and connecting the major regions of the state. The ITSP update process is just beginning, so I'll just highlight a few slides on that towards the end of the presentation. And I think for both of these, there's been quite a bit of discussion about Executive Order in 1919, which I do think just reinforces the direction that the department was already taking with the California Transportation Plan, and reinforcing our efforts to meet our greenhouse gas emissions targets, which is a statutory requirement of the CTP. So if you don't mind jumping to the next slide. So the CTP, as I said, I'm going to highlight some key aspects of it because this draft will come to you next week and go out for public comment. And so I want to make sure to really focus in on some of the key areas of the plan that I know you'll be interested in. Next slide, please. So it all starts with the vision and goals of the plan. There are 8 goals. You see 4 of them here. I want to make sure they were readable on the slides. So the vision is very aspirational. California's safe, resilient, and universally accessible transportation system supports vibrant communities, social equity, a healthy environment, and sustainable economic growth. The vision and goals were crafted through a lot of work with our Policy Advisory Committee, which is a group of our federal, state, regional, and stakeholder, including advocate partners. They provided quite a bit of input on the policy as well as the strategies and recommendations in the CTP. We also had a technical advisory group and an economic technical advisory team that advised us on the more technical elements of the plan as well. I want to also note that we started this work pre-COVID-19. So we started this well back in 2019. But we really felt, we remained committed to the goals and the vision. This is a long-term, 2050 vision for the transportation system of the state. So while we did do a little additional work to account for the short to medium-term effects that we're seeing from COVID, and I'll talk about that in one of my slides, we remain committed to the vision and the goals in the plan throughout the development process. So I think let's jump to the next slide. I just want to show you the 4 additional goals here. So there's 8 total here, the second 4. And if you jump to the next slide, I want to particularly highlight equity because this was one of the points that we really spent the most time on with our Policy Advisory Committee. And the goal language, I think, is really important, as well as the 3 primary objectives of this goal that you see on the slide. We did quite a bit of outreach in addition to working with the Policy Advisory Committee to craft the goal and objective language. We did tribal listening sessions. We did workshops on the alternative futures that we see for the state and how things like population demographics are shifting in the state and how that can craft the scenarios. We also had some deeper subject matter expert meetings around equity. So I just want to, reinforce, because I know it's an important issue to the commission, that we've spent a whole lot of time on this section of the plan. Happy to talk about that more if you have questions. Jump to the next slide, please. And then I just want to highlight for you the statutory goal of the CTP is that it demonstrates how we can meet our long-range 2050 GHG target for this state. And that target is to get to 80% below 1990 greenhouse gas emissions levels for the transportation sector. So it's really a huge goal and very ambitious. And this graph, while it's a little bit hard to read at this scale, the distinction between the different lines, I just want to point out a couple of things. So the green line represents what our model shows we can reach in terms of a GHG target in 2050 based on the population forecast of the Department of Finance. The blue line uses the population forecast of the MPOs. So there's a slight difference in the future population projections between finance and the MPOs. So we modeled both of those, and you can see that does make a pretty significant difference in our ability to reach those targets. And then the dotted lines, which are below that on the graph, represent how much closer we can get to the 2050 target, which is the star there, based on the additional strategies that the CTP modeled on top of the baseline scenario. And the baseline scenario, I should have said, includes the high-speed rail build out in their business plan. It also includes all the regional transportation plans implementation, as well as the scoping plan, the Air Resources Board scoping plan, zero emission vehicle adoption projections. So that's our baseline. And then on top of that, the CTP modeled some additional statewide strategies that we can implement. And what is of note that I want to note for you is that we don't quite get to our 2050 target, even in our most kind of ambitious projections of the strategies that we might implement. And we actually, the purple line does get there with some additional zero emission vehicle adoption beyond the ambitious projections of the Air Resources Board. So I think the point that I'd like you to take away on this slide is that we are a stretch goal away still from meeting that 2050 climate target based on the modeling in the CTP. So I want to just make sure that you recognize that when you were reviewing the plan and understanding kind of how much work we have to do in the transportation sector to reach those targets. Next slide, please. Correlated to that is, of course, vehicle miles traveled and how we are reducing vehicle miles traveled. So in addition to electric vehicles helping us to significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we don't get there with electric vehicles alone. We will also need a number of additional strategies to reduce VMT, and the ones that we modeled through the CTP are shown here, and we think this is a pretty comprehensive suite of the different strategies. So telework is, of course, one that we've talked about quite a bit. We modeled that in our plan. A number of pricing strategies, including cordon pricing, road charge pricing, and managed lanes and high occupancy vehicles. We did some pretty ambitious land use projections. And of course, rail, transit, mobility as a service. And then on the end there, you see a projected increase in VMT due to connected and autonomous vehicles. So these are what we think we might achieve in terms of VMT reduction from all of the different strategies that we modeled in the CTP. Next slide, please. And then based on our models, based on the strategies that we discussed with our policy and technical advisory committees, we make a number of recommendations in the CTP. The 14 that are highlighted here are kind of the broad categories of strategies, and there's additional detail in the plan under each of these 14 that really call out the more specific things that we as a state and partners in the transportation sector can work on together to achieve the future vision of the plan. Next slide, please. And then I said I would talk to you about COVID and how we accounted for COVID in the plan. Of course, in the spring, we were already well into the development of the CTP, but we did take a step back and say, we're seeing huge change in travel demand and how folks are moving around the state. And we really need to reevaluate what this draft document says in terms of the impacts that we might see from COVID-19. I will say that we're still at kind of an unknown place in terms of the COVID impacts and how that will change travel demand in the coming years. But we did develop some sections in the CTP which highlight what we are seeing today, and try to at least capture the trends that we're seeing over the last few months and how we think that might inform implementation of the strategies and recommendations, at least in the short and medium term. We talked about this quite a bit at our last Policy Advisory Committee meeting. We shared preliminary recommendations with them, and some of our narrative language around COVID-19, and got their feedback. So we've engaged with our partners around this issue. So you will see that reflected in the document, and we certainly welcome feedback on that. I think I said at the outset, over the long term, we don't anticipate COVID-19, necessarily impacting our vision for 2050. We still remain committed to the goals over the long range, but certainly we're seeing huge impacts to travel demand and to our economy and our communities in the short term that we want to recognize. Okay, next slide, please. So I'll wrap up CTP with just showing you the timeline. We're kind of right in the middle there in August, presenting this item to you today, and then we'll also be releasing the full draft of the CTP for public comment next week. So that will come to you. We look forward to your feedback. We've got a 60-day period by which we'll be looking for public comments and comments from the Commission in October, and hope to adopt the plan before the end of the year. All right, I will now jump to the ITSP. So next slide, please. And this, as I mentioned at the outset, we are just beginning the update of the ITSP. The last update was in 2050. So I just have a couple of slides to share with you. If you go to the next one. So 1998 was the first adoption of the ITSP. Really focused on moving goods, people interregionally between the major regions of the state. In 2015, we did a significant update of the ITSP, and really we're focused on consistency with the California Transportation Plan. At that time, it was 2040. Next slide, please. These are the major interregional routes and strategic interregional corridors that we analyzed in 2015. We anticipate, again, focusing on these key corridors as well, although of course, that will be informed through our discussions with partners and stakeholders and public workshops through the development and update of the plan. And next slide, please. And this lays out the vision of the ITSP. We will, this will provide a framework on how we will implement the goals and objectives of the CTP. So that part of the reason the ITSP is following on the CTP is to make sure there is alignment there. And of course, Executive Order 1919, which I already mentioned. This is really the goal of the ITSP is that it will provide that interregional vision for corridors across the state for the multimodal transportation system. And my final slide, if you don't mind, is just a high-level schedule. I think this is what we anticipate working with, although things are very unknown with our ability to do stakeholder and public workshops. So we are aiming for a March 2021 deadline for the ITSP. And we look forward to continued engagement with the Commission and with our partners on this schedule, on this plan. Excuse me. It's late in the day. And with that, I believe that is my last slide. So I will wrap up and happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ward-Waller. And I wanted to make sure that you were sticking around because we have a lot of questions and comments from people. The first is Commissioner Inman.
Thank you, and apologize. I think I have some background noise, but thank you for the presentation, Jeannie. And I think for all of us to really look at, none of us really know what the long-term impacts are going to be of this mass experiment that we've all been participating in. But clearly, I think that some of your models, I don't know. I mean, I think our goals, how we, maybe the goal line doesn't change, but how we get there may change dramatically. And so I think we really want to look at that. And then I think, we heard early in our meeting today from our partners that they want to be communicated with and they want to be engaged. So I just want to encourage you to do whatever we can. And I think that's on our equity issues too. So I think we really do all need to bring all the folks to the table that we can and figure out what our collective path forward is. I mean, especially in transportation, because so much of our funding comes from our partners. So I think we really do need strong partnerships. I think we have alignment in goals, but I think how we get there, our housing, who knows? We've struggled with, our housing crisis, and we're still struggling. And, the deliveries, clearly we've seen e-commerce. I think, we all shop. Retail was struggling, the bricks and mortar anyway. And I think that COVID has been an accelerator, and we're going to see dramatic changes in that regard. And then I think on the interregional plan, really to make sure, we have clearly our rural partners have social justice, equity, all of those things. And I think for all of us, just collectively, to make sure that we get everybody's at the table and we work together to really find the solutions. We had corridors that were in and then out and then in. I don't know, but we've been spending a lot of time on resiliency, on the essential supply chain. We have struggled with keeping food on all the tables. We know that we've got issues around seasonality and all of the different variables that we need to work with. So thank you for the good work, but I encourage you to really make sure that we do bring folks in so everybody owns the outcome, because we'll all be
If I may.
Thank you,
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm
yes,
still
Commissioner, I would like to make sure
technologically.
Jeannie can.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm still technologically challenged, so it's hard to know when to weigh in. I'll wait for your signal, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to, I'll definitely call on you right after since you are connected, but I just wanted to have Jeannie Wardwaller answer Commissioner Inman's questions.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Inman, it's a fantastic question. I think the CTP is, it's a long-range plan for the entire transportation system, not just the piece that Caltrans controls. So while Caltrans is responsible for developing the plan, it's absolutely a plan that will be implemented by all of us in the transportation sector. So we are committed to working together with our partners on implementation and making sure that we're creating a vision that has broad buy-in. So the next step after adopting the plan will be to really work together on the implementation element of the plan. And that will be a collective effort, absolutely. And just as, it has been in developing the plan to date. So absolutely agree with you. And, we also start working on the next update to the plan as soon as we finish this one. So the modeling is sort of a continuous effort, and we will be looking at the trends short and long term and continuing to tweak the assumptions in the model so that we are accounting for all the changes in technology, changes in the economy, population, demographics, all of those things are inputs to the model and need to continue to evolve over time as we do see these changes. So very much appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll move to Commissioner Guardino.
Thank you, Chair Norton. And Jeannie, thank you again for the presentation and your work on this really vital effort. I agree with Commissioner Inman's comments and would like to build on those as well as the direction long overdue that we're taking on equity. And as we look at our rural areas and our rural counties, where some of California's most underserved populations reside, it only underscores to me how much we will all benefit by doing all that we can to continue to include and enhance the participation and the voices of our rural counties, especially since so much has changed in the last 5 years since 2015, and so much of the commission has changed in that time too. So through the chair, I'd like to suggest that with the help of our staff, that we reach out and perhaps for our October meeting, invite in some of the rural counties or any that would like to participate to come in so that we can hear them, interact with them as we continue to build this plan. So I'd be looking to see if we can do that at our October meeting, giving us a couple of months to plan for it and to do it right.
Thank you, Commissioner Guardino. We recognize how important the interregional system is to our rural partners, and we know there's keen interest in this plan. So we would love to have deeper discussion at the October meeting.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Jeannie. Appreciate all your work and your collaboration.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Mitch. I just want to chime in real quick. And this has been important. Commissioner Alvarado has sent me a note also in making sure that we coordinate with the rural agencies and see if there's perhaps a reason, whether it's the October meeting, in conjunction with the October meeting, but perhaps help coordinate a workshop, make sure we get commissioners and some of the rural partners there. So Jeannie, we'll reach out and work with you guys on that.
And Executive Director Weiss, I agree with that thought. Workshops are fantastic. For me, it should be an and, not an or, because the workshops wouldn't include all the commissioners. And I know this commissioner would greatly benefit by it, and I hope my colleague commissioners would as well.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to change conjunctions. And
That's great. Commissioner Eager, you had some questions as well.
I did, and thank you so much for those who spoke before me, Commissioner Inman, really talking about making sure that everyone has a voice. I wanted to reiterate that certainly coming from the Central Valley here, we have a large portion of our communities that are in rural California, and sometimes I think feel like their voices are not heard. So I certainly appreciate this conversation. I did have a question about the Policy Advisory Committee. And is there a list of who's on it and how they were selected to be on that committee?
Thank you, Commissioner Eager. Yes, the draft document of the CTP does have a list of all the partners that were engaged in the Policy Advisory Committee. We have, in terms of how they were selected, it was a combination of stakeholders that I think we work on regularly on our planning documents. It's also a combination of regional and local agencies. And of course, we want to make sure the associations like the Rural Counties Task Force, the Association of Counties, and MPOs, the RTPAs, excuse me, we're all engaged, as well as a pretty large diversity of different advocacy groups as well. So happy to follow up with you offline if you have more questions about the selection process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Commissioner Lyou.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeannie, for the presentation. When I got appointed to this commission, I had the full expectation that I'd be using all of these interregional transportation systems and seeing a lot more of California. And for the last 6 months, I don't think I've actually left this office chair, but maybe someday I will actually get to serve as a commissioner who has in-person meetings and gets to see that you people are more than just images on a screen. I would like to take you up on your offer to talk more about equity issues. I took a look at the previous version of this plan, and I have to say I was pretty disappointed in the lack of material on transportation equity and environmental justice. And the statute does require that the department consider environmental justice. And if you could just provide a little more detail. I saw the objectives, and I think this is great. It looks to me like you have stepped up the consideration of environmental justice and equity issues in this version of the plan. But if you talk a little bit more about it, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lyou. Happy to, and I hope when you actually see the full document that you will be that it will reinforce your assumption just by seeing the goals that we really have made a much more concerted effort to embed equity and environmental justice throughout the document, and particularly in the recommendations and strategies. In addition to the equity goal, which is of course focused on these issues, we've really made an effort to embed equity throughout all of the goals in the plan. So you'll see strategies across all of the 8 goals and in the recommendations. So, I welcome more discussion on this topic, and I'm happy to have an offline meeting with you to really talk about it and dive in deeper. I believe the 2040 plan, which is the one you're referring to, preceded the requirement to include equity and environmental justice in the plan. So that I will double check on that, but I think that statute is a new requirement on the 2050 plan. So look forward to more discussion and your comments on the plan once you have a chance to review the full draft.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is very, very helpful, and we look forward to the next update on this and the release. If we could move on to,
Sure.
Oh, we have an attendee comment, okay?
Yes, we have Michael Woodman. You're now unmuted and free to speak. Michael, you're currently self-muted.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Mike Woodman, Deputy Executive Director of the Nevada County Transportation Commission and Chair of the North State Super Region. For those that may not be familiar with the North State Super Region, the group was formalized in 2010 and represents a partnership between the 16 Northern California RTPAs and MPOs in order to provide a unified voice when addressing state and federal transportation funding policy decisions and to enhance coordination of transportation planning efforts within the super region. Jeannie, I just want to thank you for the engagement in the development of the CTP 2050 draft, working with the Rural Counties Task Force in the North State Super Region. Regarding the ITSP update, the North State Super Region encourages Caltrans to have an open and transparent process with early and active engagement with the regional agencies. The ITSP drives the investment strategies for the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program. And by law, a minimum of 60% of the ITIP funding must be allocated to projects on the interregional roadway system and intercity rail system outside of urbanized areas. As we as a state focus on equity and transportation planning and funding decisions, we need to ensure that there's a focus on geographic equity across the state. There must also be a balance between the needs of intercity passenger rail and interregional highway projects, and ensure that ITIP investments are able to leverage regional improvement program funding on improvements that provide critical connections between rural disadvantaged communities and economic job centers and connections to multimodal options. These projects improve goods movement, safety, and operations, and are important to the economic health of the rural regions, and are crucial if we're going to have regions rise together out of COVID-19. The North State Super Region would also request that Caltrans review some of the interregional routes that were removed in the last update. And to conclude my comments, the North State Super Region looks forward to the opportunity for continued coordination and additional opportunities to provide input on the update of the ITSP. We look forward to helping to assist in meeting the state's climate goals while also delivering vital transportation projects that address the rural interregional needs and priorities across the North State. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, I want to ask
one more. Up next, we have Ivan Garcia.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can. Yes,
Oh,
we can,
thank
sir.
God. You can now. I want to apologize for earlier. I accidentally bumped my computer and the phone disconnected. My name is Ivan Garcia. I'm with the Butte County Association of Governments. Before I jump into this, if Secretary Kim, if you are listening, I want to really thank Darwin Masavi for presenting to this statewide RTPA group on July 31st. We had about 107 participants. Jeannie, thank you for your presentation. Very, very well done. I've invited your staff to provide a workshop to the statewide RTPA group, and I'm sure we'll have similar numbers of attendance. I just want to ditto Commissioner Inman and Guardino's comments, as well as Mike Woodman. This is very important. It sets the framework of how we program projects in the future, and I just want to make sure we get all of the comments. It's very helpful when we have these workshops in front of the statewide RTPA group. You know, we're the troops on the ground to make sure projects get delivered successfully. So we just want to have that opportunity, and it's so helpful to hear the discussion from the various regions at the same time. And again, I'll be getting together with your staff next week to set a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Thank you. I want to make sure that commissioners, that we can hang in there so that we can get through the consent agenda today, and then start with Keith Gunn and self-help counties, and then move through the rest of the agenda tomorrow. So with that, I want to get to item 23, the adoption of fiscal year 20 to 21 road maintenance and rehab account.
Thank you, commissioners. Item 23 is an action item. It's for the adoption of the fiscal year 2020-21 road maintenance and rehabilitation account, local streets and roads funding initial report of eligible cities and counties. In order for jurisdictions to be included in this list, they must adopt by resolution a list of projects that are expected to receive or utilize this fiscal year fund, program funds for which they're seeking eligibility. As you may recall, in April, we made a one-time amendment to the annual program schedule, extending the deadline to July 15th as a result of COVID impacts. As of July 15th, 2020, 521 out of the 539 jurisdictions had submitted their required resolution and project list detail to the Commission. This leaves us with 18 cities remaining that need to seek eligibility come September 30th for adoption at our October meeting. Upon all of these cities, the 18 remaining and the 521 that have been deemed eligible, cities and counties deemed eligible, are indicated in attachment B. As soon as we have adopted, following this time, we will transmit the list and our action item to the state controller's office for them to begin the apportionment to the cities and counties following this meeting. That will all begin in September. The current estimate for the fiscal year 2021 funding is $1.1 billion. This is roughly a 5.5% decrease to the prior estimate for the fiscal year. Are there any questions?
Okay. Any public comment? No public comment. Thank you very much, Alicia. That was very thorough.
Thank you. And staff does recommend adoption for this item.
Yes, we actually, because this is an action item, we will need a motion.
Commissioner Lyou will move the item as proposed by staff.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Is there a
Alvarado
second?
seconds the motion.
Wonderful. Commissioner Alvarado seconds. Douglas, can you please call the
Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes.
Commissioner Burke.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Lyou.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the item is approved.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 24. the 2020 report of STIP balances, county and interregional shares. Teresa?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This item 24 is an information item. This item is the 2020 report on STIP county and interregional shares balances, otherwise known as the Orange Book. Staff requires the Commission keep a record of county share balances and to make the balances through the end of each fiscal year available to regions by no later than August 15th. This year's report was posted on the Commission's website and it was transmitted to the regions on August 1st. For each county share and for the interregional share, the Orange Book lists the shares available, including all adjustments to the shares and a reconciliation from the previous report. Each project program from the shares, including allocations made throughout the year, and the unprogrammed share remaining. We do on occasions find errors in our records, which is one of the reasons we share this information in this manner. As always, staff will work with any agencies that have questions about the data in this report. Madam Chair, that concludes my report. Thank you. This is only
you, Teresa. Yes. No comments. Are there any public comments? No comments from the commissioners? Okay, great. We're going to move on to item 25. And item 25 is the update on applications received for SB1 programs and the active transportation program. Dawn Chesser?
Thank you, Commissioners. So tab 25 is an information item. And please note that you received a revised book item yesterday via email. This item provides a summary of the applications received for the local partnership, the congested corridors, the trade corridors, and the quick build pilot program within the ATP. In total, we have received 152 applications requesting $3.7 billion, which is more than double the amount that we have available for programming at $1.7 billion. A receipt log is available for each of the programs on our website with links to a 2-page project fact sheet. The programming team at the Commission are in the process of evaluating the project applications, which will continue over the next couple of months. Staff recommendations for local partnership, congested corridors, and trade corridors will be released on November 12th, and the quick build pilot program recommendations will be released on September 15th. No action is required on this item, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, commissioners, are there any questions that you may have on this item? No? Are there any public comment requests? Okay, no, thank you so much, Don. We'll be following up with you on this. With that, let's go to the information calendar, 26 through 34.
Yes, Chair, it was requested that we remove items 26 and item 34 from the information calendar. Would you like to take those first, or would you like me to present the rest of the information calendar first?
Let's take those first.
Okay. So item 26 will be presented by myself. Item 26 is a Caltrans information item reporting allocations made by Caltrans for emergency, CC, and shot miner projects. The Commission has delegated the authority for Caltrans to allocate funds for these types of projects with the requirement that the allocations be reported at the next Commission meeting. There was one change to item number 26 noted on the change list. An allocation date was added to the book item. Staff has reviewed these allocations and finds them acceptable, and this concludes the presentation of this information item.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Liu had a question on this item.
Yeah. Madam Chair, thank you. My question didn't anticipate it being 5:15 at night when I was going to ask it, but I'll do it nonetheless since I did ask about this item. On number 13 on this list is the Los Angeles Vincent Thomas Bridge, which was added as an emergency item back in February of 2018. Now there's this is a supplemental allocation, I guess a supplemental emergency allocation. It came to my attention that we actually don't have a policy on how to treat supplemental emergency allocation requests from emergencies from, more than 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I guess the question that Mitch and I discussed was whether or not we need to figure out how to treat emergencies that then become ongoing problems. And maybe it's too complicated a question to ask at 5:15 at night, but I would appreciate it if staff could give me some feedback.
So I will, it sounds like it's more of a question with regards to procedure, because we do see these supplementals fairly frequently. We have a meeting Friday morning to work with Caltrans on these supplementals and what our procedure is on supplementals to these emergency projects. So perhaps we could meet with them and then we could fill you in on where we're at, because I think you're right. There is a little bit of, it looked like gray area to us as far as how we handle the supplementals on these G11 emergency projects.
Wonderful. It sounds like you're on top of it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from commissioners on this item? No? And no public comment? Great. So 26 is complete. Let's go to 34 now.
Thank you, commissioners. Item 34 is an information item. It's for the update on the State Route 710 sale of excess properties and revenue disposition for the 710 Local Alternative Transportation Improvement Program. This is a standing annual update the department provides on the status of the sales of excess properties and the revenue. As of June 30th, 2020, the State Route 710 sales have been accounted for as follows. The total revenue transferred for the State Route 710 LA tip is $1.5 million. The total revenue spent for property repair is $0.4 million. And the total revenue reserved in the State Route 710 account per law is $0.5 million. This leaves a total sales revenue of $2.4 million as accounted for by Caltrans. We do have District 7 District Director John Belinsky on the line and logged in to the meeting should you have any questions in regards to this update.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this item? Commissioner Liu.
Yes, I didn't anticipate it'd be 5:18 p.m. when I asked this question. So please accommodate me here. But this, has to do with these excess properties along the 710, what was going to be the 710 North. And it's been a very slow process of disposing of them. And it's interesting it comes up today when we're spending so much time on transportation equity issues, because this is a prime example of where transportation decisions have had a very stark and disproportionate impact on a low-income community of color. Currently, Senator Durazo has a bill, SB 9, that may impact how these properties are sold by Caltrans, and we'll soon figure out whether or not that bill is going to become law. I think it's important, an important issue that's worth more discussion, and would hope that staff could work with the department perhaps to do a presentation on the sale of 710 properties at some point in the future. That's what my request was. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll make note of that and work with Caltrans.
Great, thank you very much. Good question, Joe, no matter what time it is. So with that, and there are no public comments on this, with that, John, could you get us through 27 through 33, please?
Yes. So 27 through 33, those 7 items are the information items, and they are on the information calendar because they're deemed by staff not to raise any issues, and therefore the individual items will not be presented unless specifically requested by a commissioner. So that concludes the presentation of the information calendar.
Okay, thank you. And with no other requests for items to be pulled, we're going to begin the consent calendar. So if someone would like to make a motion regarding the consent calendar, unless anyone would like to pull any of the items.
We have one item to get pulled off.
Okay, there's one item that will be pulled. And that
John,
item is
what's that item?
Yeah, 38.
38. Okay. Let's go through the rest of the
That was me.
consent.
I don't need to pull that item. I can deal with that offline.
Okay, but we do need to read a change into the record. So, John, do you want to do that?
I can do that. So Items 35 through 47 are on the consent calendar. There's one change to item number 39 on the change list. The agenda title has been updated from 5 to 6 relinquishments to match what was posted in the book item. So with this change, commission staff recommends approval of items 35 through 47 on the consent calendar.
Okay, do we have a motion for the consent calendar?
Kehoe. Commissioner Guardino.
Commissioner Burke?
Second, Commissioner Davis.
Okay, great. Commissioner Guardino makes the motion. Davis seconds. Could you read the roll, Doug?
Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Burke.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Lyou.
Aye.
Commissioner Tabelloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the item is approved.
Okay, wonderful. And that will conclude our meeting for today. Note that it is the end of day 1 and day 2 has its own access code, and day 2 begins at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you very much for being part of day 1 with us. Have a good evening.